They called her damaged goods because of her limp, but what they couldn't see was the unwavering strength that carried her through every storm. The train whistle's final wail echoed across the dusty platform of Cedar Ridge as autumn leaves danced in spirals around worn boots and traveling skirts. Eleanor Hartwell stepped carefully from the passenger car, her left foot finding purchase with the deliberate care that had marked every step of her 24 years. The wooden platform creaked under her weight, and she steadied herself with the walking stick her father had carved from sturdy oak before his passing. Around her, other young women were being swept into eager embraces by men who had traveled from ranches and homesteads, their faces bright with nervous excitement and hope. Eleanor stood alone, her carpet bag clutched in her free hand, watching as couple after couple disappeared into waiting wagons. The crisp October air carried scents of wood smoke and distant apple orchards, but underneath lay the dusty promise of a frontier town still carving itself from wild land. She had grown accustomed to waiting, to being the last chosen, the reluctant option when all others had been claimed. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Your comment helps our community grow stronger. Thanks, and let's get back to the story. Sheriff Marcus Coleman approached with measured steps, his badge catching the late afternoon sunlight. Eleanor recognized him immediately from the tintype photograph he had sent to the matrimonial agency in Kansas City. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that refused to stay properly combed and eyes the color of storm clouds, he was handsome in the rugged way that frontier life carved into a man's features. But when his gaze found her walking stick, and the careful way she shifted her weight, she saw the familiar flicker of disappointment cross his face. He removed his hat, revealing hair that stuck up at odd angles, and cleared his throat. "Miss Hartwell, I presume?" "Yes, Sheriff Coleman." Eleanor kept her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She had learned long ago not to apologize for what she could not change, but the weight of his hesitation settled around her shoulders like a familiar shawl. "I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." His eyes kept darting to her stick, then away, as if politeness demanded he not stare at what clearly troubled him. "Not at all. The railroad makes travel quite comfortable these days." Eleanor straightened her spine, calling upon the dignity her mother had insisted was every woman's birthright, regardless of her circumstances. They stood in awkward silence as the platform emptied around them. The other mail-order brides had vanished into their new lives, leaving Eleanor in the growing shadows of a town that already felt like another place where she might not belong. "Perhaps," Marcus began carefully, "we might discuss the arrangement. There's a boarding house where you could stay while we become better acquainted." Eleanor understood. She had heard these words before, in Denver and in Sacramento, from men who had seemed interested in correspondence but found the reality of her condition too daunting to accept. "Of course, Sheriff. I understand that my circumstances may not meet your expectations." Relief flickered across his features, followed immediately by guilt. He was not a cruel man, Eleanor realized, merely one who had hoped for something different than what stood before him. Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house sat at the end of Main Street like a dowager aunt supervising a rowdy family gathering. The proprietress herself emerged as Marcus helped Eleanor from his wagon, her gray hair pulled into a sensible bun and her apron bearing the evidence of a day spent in profitable cooking. She took one look at Eleanor's situation and clicked her tongue in disapproval, though whether at Eleanor's condition or Marcus's obvious discomfort remained unclear. "Well then," Mrs. Abernathy declared, "I have a nice room on the ground floor. No stairs to manage." She directed this comment to Eleanor with the brisk kindness of a woman who had seen enough of life's disappointments to recognize them when they arrived on her doorstep. Eleanor's room proved clean and comfortable, with a window overlooking the town's main thoroughfare. As evening settled over Cedar Ridge, she unpacked her few belongings and tried not to think about the letters she would need to write, the explanation she would have to offer to the matrimonial agency, the long journey back to Kansas City where her sister would accept her return with sympathetic eyes and careful silence. But as she prepared for bed, the sounds of the frontier town filtered through her window. Shouting erupted from the saloon across the street, followed by the crash of breaking glass. Horse hooves thundered past at dangerous speed, and somewhere in the distance, a woman screamed. Eleanor moved to her window and peered through the curtain to see Marcus running toward the disturbance, his hand on his gun, his deputy nowhere in sight. The commotion continued well into the night, and Eleanor found herself listening to each sound, cataloging the rhythm of trouble that seemed to pulse through Cedar Ridge like a fever. Her father had been a town marshal in Missouri, and she had grown up understanding the patterns of lawlessness, the way violence and disorder could take root in a community like weeds in untended soil. Morning brought answers to the previous night's chaos. Mrs. Abernathy served breakfast with a side of local gossip, explaining that Deputy Hayes had been shot the week before and still lay bedridden with fever. The nearest marshal lived 3 days right away, leaving Marcus to handle the growing problems alone. That young sheriff stretched thinner than butter on bread, Mrs. Abernathy declared, refilling Eleanor's coffee cup. Town's growing faster than law and order can keep up. Railroad brought prosperity, but it also brought folks who'd rather steal than work for their living. Eleanor found herself studying the sheriff's office across the street through the boarding house's front window. Even from this distance, she could see papers scattered across every surface, documents stuffed into overflowing boxes. And Marcus himself moving through the chaos with the harried expression of a man drowning in responsibilities he had never been trained to handle. Her fingers traced the smooth wood of her walking stick as an idea began to form. She had spent her childhood in her father's office, learning to organize witness statements, file reports, and maintain the careful records that transformed random acts of violence into patterns that could be understood and prevented. Her physical limitations had made her an observer rather than a participant, but observation had taught her skills that might prove valuable. After breakfast, Eleanor made her way slowly across the dusty street, her stick clicking against the wooden planks of the sidewalk. The sheriff's office door stood open, and she could hear Marcus cursing softly at a pile of papers that seemed determined to slide off his desk every time he tried to organize them. "Sheriff Coleman?" She knocked gently on the doorframe. He looked up, his hair even more disheveled than the previous day, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked with ink stains. "Miss Hartwell, I trust you slept well." As well as could be expected, Eleanor stepped into the office, taking careful note of the chaos that surrounded them. "I wonder if I might offer my assistance." Marcus blinked at her in confusion. "Your assistance?" "My father was a town marshal in Missouri. I spent considerable time helping him maintain his records and files. I notice you seem to be managing quite a lot of work without your deputy." "Oh." Marcus looked around his office as if seeing the disaster for the first time. "Yes, well, I'm not much for paperwork, I'm afraid. Always preferred the writing and investigating to the writing and filing." Eleanor moved carefully toward his desk, her trained eye already identifying the different types of documents scattered there. "Would you mind if I took a look? Sometimes a fresh perspective can help identify patterns that aren't immediately obvious." For the next hour, Eleanor sorted through witness statements, crime reports, and complaint forms while Marcus watched with growing amazement. Her movements were deliberate and methodical, each paper examined carefully before being placed in its proper category. What had seemed like an impossible tangle of information began to resolve itself into comprehensible patterns. "These 3 incidents," Eleanor said, pointing to a cluster of reports, "all occurred on nights when the eastbound train arrived late. The perpetrators seemed to be targeting passengers who missed their connections and had to spend unexpected nights in town." Marcus leaned over her shoulder to examine the documents. "I hadn't noticed that connection. And these break-ins all happened at businesses within sight of the railroad depot. Someone's been watching the trains, learning the schedules, identifying opportunities." Eleanor's voice grew more confident as the pattern became clear. "You're not dealing with random crime, Sheriff. You have an organized group that's been studying your town's routines." For the first time since Eleanor had met him, Marcus smiled with genuine appreciation. "Miss Hartwell, I believe you may have just solved several cases that have been keeping me awake at night." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced since her father's death. "Would it be helpful if I continued organizing these files? I noticed several other cases that might benefit from closer examination." "That would be extraordinarily helpful if you're certain you don't mind the work." "I've always found comfort in bringing order to chaos," Eleanor replied truthfully. Over the following days, Eleanor established herself as an unofficial assistant to the sheriff's office. Each morning, she would make her careful way across the street from the boarding house, her walking stick marking a steady rhythm on the wooden sidewalks. The townspeople grew accustomed to seeing her through the office windows, bent over papers and files, transforming Marcus's chaotic record-keeping into a system that actually functioned. Her methodical approach proved invaluable in ways that surprised everyone, including Eleanor herself. Her slower pace meant she noticed details that others missed in their hurry to move on to the next crisis. When Mrs. Peterson reported jewelry missing from her home, Eleanor spent an hour examining the scene while Marcus interviewed neighbors. Her careful observation revealed that the thief had intimate knowledge of the house's layout, leading to the discovery that Mrs. Peterson's own nephew had been stealing from her to pay gambling debts. Word of Eleanor's contributions began to spread through Cedar Ridge. She couldn't pursue criminals on horseback or engage in gunfights, but her ability to analyze patterns and organize information proved crucial to solving cases that had previously seemed impossible to crack. The turning point came on a Thursday evening in late October. Eleanor was working late in the sheriff's office, organizing evidence from a recent string of cattle thefts, when shouting erupted from the saloon district. Through the window, she could see men running in different directions, and the sound of breaking glass suggested another fight had begun. Marcus burst through the door, strapping on his gun belt. "Stay here and lock the door behind me," he instructed. "There's trouble at the Golden Nugget, and it sounds like it's spreading." Eleanor nodded, but as Marcus disappeared into the darkness, she realized she could hear something he had missed. Underneath the obvious commotion from the saloon came the sound of horses moving quietly down the alley behind the bank. She moved to the back window of the office, using her walking stick to steady herself as she peered into the shadows. For men were dismounting near the bank's rear entrance, their movements coordinated and purposeful. While the town's attention focused on the distraction at the saloon, these men were preparing to rob the bank. Eleanor recognized the pattern immediately from her study of the recent crimes: create chaos in one location to mask criminal activity in another. Her heart pounded as she realized Marcus and the few available men were all dealing with the saloon fight, leaving the bank completely unprotected. She could try to reach the saloon to warn them, but her slow movement would ensure the robbery was completed before help could arrive. Instead, Eleanor made a decision that would have seemed impossible to her just weeks earlier. She gathered several shotguns from the office's gun rack, loading each with the careful precision her father had taught her years ago. Then she made her way to the bank, moving as quickly as her condition allowed, using back streets and alleys to avoid detection. The bank's rear door had been forced open, and Eleanor could hear the robbers working inside, their voices confident with the assumption that they had created the perfect distraction. She positioned herself behind a water trough that provided cover while giving her a clear view of both the bank's exits. "This is Sheriff Coleman's office," she called out in her strongest voice. "You're surrounded. Come out with your hands visible." The sounds from inside the bank stopped abruptly. Eleanor held her breath, knowing her bluff would only work if the criminals believed they faced organized opposition rather than one woman with a walking stick. "There's only one voice," someone whispered from inside the bank. "Could be a trap," another replied. "Coleman's smarter than we gave him credit for." Eleanor used their uncertainty to her advantage. "You have 1 minute to surrender before we come in after you." The bank robbers emerged slowly, their hands raised, squinting into the darkness to try to identify their captors. Eleanor remained hidden behind the water trough, her shotgun trained on the group, knowing that discovery would mean disaster. "Keep moving toward the street," she instructed. "Nice and slow." As the robbers moved away from the bank, Eleanor followed at a distance, using her knowledge of the town's layout to guide them toward the sheriff's office. Her slow, measured pace actually worked in her favor, as it prevented the criminals from realizing they were being herded by a single person. Marcus arrived at his office to find 4 men sitting on the ground with their hands secured behind their backs, Eleanor standing guard with a shotgun despite the obvious strain the evening's activities had placed on her. "How in the world?" Marcus began. "They used the saloon fight as a distraction," Eleanor explained, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "I heard them moving behind the bank and realized what was happening. Someone needed to act before they escaped with the town's money." Marcus stared at her with something approaching awe. "You captured 4 armed men by yourself?" "I convinced them they were outnumbered," Eleanor corrected. "Sometimes the appearance of strength is more effective than strength itself." Word of Eleanor's single-handed prevention of the bank robbery spread through Cedar Ridge faster than a prairie fire. By morning, the entire town knew that the quiet woman with the walking stick had outsmarted and captured the gang that had been terrorizing local businesses for weeks. Mrs. Abernathy declared Eleanor a local hero over breakfast, and throughout the day, townspeople stopped by the sheriff's office to thank her personally. Eleanor found their attention overwhelming but deeply satisfying. For the first time in her adult life, she was being recognized not despite her limitations, but for abilities that had nothing to do with how quickly she could walk or whether she needed assistance navigating stairs. Marcus's attitude toward Eleanor underwent a complete transformation. The awkward politeness of their first meeting gave way to genuine respect and admiration. He began seeking her opinion on all aspects of law enforcement, from analyzing crime patterns to developing strategies for preventing future incidents. "I've been thinking," Marcus said one evening as they worked together in the office, Eleanor organizing files while he cleaned his weapons. "This town needs someone with your skills on a permanent basis. The territorial government's been talking about establishing a proper court system, which means we'll need someone who understands legal procedures and record keeping." Eleanor looked up from the stack of papers she was reviewing. "Are you offering me a job, Sheriff?" "I'm offering you a partnership," Marcus replied. "This town's growing, and it needs law enforcement that can think as well as shoot. You've proven you can do things I never could." The word partnership hung in the air between them, carrying implications that extended far beyond professional collaboration. Eleanor had come to Cedar Ridge as a mail-order bride, rejected for her physical limitations. But in the weeks since her arrival, she had discovered that her true strength lay not in what her body could do, but in what her mind could accomplish. "I would be honored to accept such a partnership," Eleanor said carefully. Marcus set down the gun he had been cleaning and moved to stand beside her chair. "Eleanor, I need to apologize for my initial reaction when you arrived. I was looking for something I thought I wanted instead of recognizing what I actually needed." Eleanor felt her heart quicken at the sincere regret in his voice. "What do you think you needed?" "Someone who could make me a better man and make this town a safer place. Someone with the courage to face danger even when it means overcoming personal limitations. Someone who sees solutions where others see only problems." Marcus knelt beside her chair, bringing their eyes to the same level. "I was so focused on what you couldn't do that I missed everything you could do." The confession hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Eleanor had spent her life being valued for her limitations rather than her abilities, treated as someone to be pitied or helped rather than respected and relied upon. Marcus was offering her something she had never dared to hope for: recognition of her true worth. "Are you saying that my limitations have become advantages?" Eleanor asked. "I'm saying that what others see as limitations, I've learned to recognize as unique strengths. Your careful pace means you notice things others miss. Your need to plan ahead makes you better at preventing problems than those of us who just react to them. Your understanding of what it means to be underestimated gives you insights into human nature that make you an excellent judge of character." Eleanor reached out to touch his hand, feeling the calluses that marked his work as a peace officer. "And what about the original arrangement?" The matrimonial contract. Marcus's storm gray eyes held her steadily. I'd like to propose a new arrangement. One based on partnership rather than convenience, respect rather than obligation, and love rather than necessity. The word love settled between them with the weight of genuine emotion rather than desperate hope. Eleanor had dreamed of being loved despite her limitations, but Marcus was offering something far more precious. Love because of who she was, walking stick and all. Yes, Eleanor whispered, the single word carrying all the acceptance and hope her heart could hold. Their engagement became the talk of Cedar Ridge, but not for the reasons Eleanor had feared. Instead of whispered comments about the sheriff settling for damaged goods, the townspeople celebrated the union of two people whose combined strengths made them formidable partners in both law enforcement and life. The wedding took place on a crisp November morning in the town's small church, with Mrs. Abernathy serving as matron of honor and half the town crowding into the wooden pews. Eleanor walked down the aisle with steady, measured steps, her walking stick keeping time with the hymn being played on the slightly out-of-tune piano. But instead of trying to hide her limp or apologize for her pace, she moved with quiet dignity, knowing that the man waiting for her at the altar valued her exactly as she was. Marcus's vow spoke of partnership and mutual respect, of finding strength in unexpected places, and of the courage required to see past surface appearances to the true worth beneath. Eleanor's vows promised steadiness in chaos, loyalty in difficulty, and the kind of quiet strength that endures when flashier qualities fade. As they exchanged rings, Eleanor felt the weight of years of rejection and disappointment lift from her shoulders. She had come to Cedar Ridge as a last resort, a woman whose physical limitations made her undesirable in a world that valued appearance over substance. But she was leaving the church as half of a partnership built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and the recognition that true strength often comes in unexpected forms. The reception took place in the church hall, with Mrs. Abernathy's famous apple cake and dancing that continued well into the evening. Eleanor participated as she could, her walking stick propped against the wall while Marcus held her steady for the slower songs. But more often, she found herself in conversations with townspeople who sought her advice on various matters, from settling disputes to organizing community improvements. As the evening wound down, Eleanor and Marcus walked slowly to their new home, a small house behind the sheriff's office that would allow them to work together while maintaining their privacy. The autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and the promise of winter, but Eleanor felt only warmth as Marcus helped her up the front steps. No regrets? Marcus asked as they paused on the threshold. Eleanor looked back at the town that had become her home, at the people who had learned to value her contributions, at the man who had discovered that her greatest limitation was actually her most valuable asset. Only that I waited so long to find a place where being steady and reliable mattered more than being fast and flashy. Marcus opened the door to their new life together, and Eleanor stepped inside with the same careful, measured pace that had marked every step of her journey. But now, each step carried her toward a future where her walking stick was simply another tool in service of the community she protected, and her limp was just another part of the woman who had taught a frontier town that true strength comes in many forms. In the months that followed, Eleanor and Marcus established themselves as the most effective law enforcement team the territory had ever seen. Eleanor's analytical mind and attention to detail perfectly complemented Marcus's courage and physical abilities. Crime rates dropped dramatically as potential criminals learned that Cedar Ridge was protected by partners who combined traditional law enforcement skills with innovative investigative techniques. Eleanor established the first proper filing system for legal documents in the territory, creating a model that other towns began to adopt. Her careful record-keeping helped solve cases from surrounding communities, and her reputation as an investigator spread throughout the region. But perhaps most importantly, Eleanor's presence in Cedar Ridge changed how the community thought about strength, value, and contribution. Children with disabilities found in her an example of how limitations could be transformed into advantages. Women discovered that intelligence and determination were as valuable as physical beauty, and men learned that true partnership meant recognizing and valuing all forms of strength. As Eleanor sat in the sheriff's office on a snowy December evening, organizing evidence from their latest case while Marcus prepared for his evening patrol, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had boarded a train in Kansas City as a woman defined by her limitations, someone who limped through life apologizing for taking up space. She had found her place as half of a partnership that made both of them stronger, in a community that valued her contributions, doing work that utilized her unique strengths. Marcus paused at the door before beginning his patrol. I'll be back within the hour. Try not to solve any major crimes while I'm gone. Eleanor smiled, her attention already focused on the papers before her. I make no promises, Sheriff Coleman. As Marcus disappeared into the snowy evening, Eleanor continued her work, her walking stick leaning against the desk within easy reach. No longer a symbol of limitation but simply another tool in the arsenal of a woman who had learned that steady strength could move mountains, one careful step at a time.